Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Robert Kurtz, moderator for the program, brought to you by Priority One Group, which is proud to celebrate its 20th anniversary this year. Priority One Group is a leading provider of integrated healthcare IT services to organizations including medical practices, surgery centers, and hospitals. Our program will begin with a presentation. We will have a question and answer session following completion of the presentation. You can submit any questions you have throughout the presentation by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. Our presenter will attempt to answer as many questions as he can during the time we have, and will follow up on questions he does not have the opportunity to address. You'll also receive an email within a few days that will include a copy of the presentations, instructions for how you can view a recording of the program, and a survey about the webinar. You can submit your feedback or any additional questions at that time. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Wicks Moffitt is a pioneer in the healthcare compliance industry and has over 25 years of experience and expertise. Wicks is currently a principal and executive vice president of compliance at Healthcare Compliance Network and is certified in healthcare compliance from the Healthcare Compliance Association. Throughout his career, he has managed compliance projects of all sizes and has served over 3,000 healthcare organizations in implementing regulatory compliance plans for HIPAA high-tech, corporate compliance and fraud, waste and abuse, billing compliance, chart auditing, and OSHA safety. I would now like to turn the floor over to Wicks for today's presentation. Wicks.
Hello, everybody, and Robert, thanks for the introduction, and thanks also to Priority One and Nelson Gomes over there for allowing me to come and present to you all today. And as you all know, the topic is top 10 compliance issues for a medical practice. A medical practice is a little bit, maybe, it's a loose term there. It could be ambulatory surgery center, it could be urgent care, it could be lab, but basically any sort of non-hospital organization is what we have focused on working with over the last 25 years. And if you'll notice on the slide, there's my email address and my phone number. So if anybody ever has any questions or anything, or they don't get answered during this, feel free to contact me at any time. Not sure. Okay, there we go. I wanted to start out just with a couple of quick slides and showing really all of the regulations, unfortunately, that you guys day in, day out have to address it. It really doesn't matter whether you're in Piscataway, Parsippany, or Peoria. Really the 3 or 4 main issues that you need to deal with are CMS, HIPAA, OSHA, and employee policies. That's not to say that you may not have other issues that you need to deal with, like the DEA, or the Joint Commission, or you know, state agencies and all of that. We years ago hired the Assistant Attorney General, and he worked with us for many years, and he always used to sort of joke, which a lot of people didn't think was much of a joke at the beginning of his presentation. He said, you know, you can run a nuclear power plant and you have less regulatory oversight than a medical practice does. And so as you look at all of this sort of alphabet soup of all these regulatory agencies, you can see certainly what he was talking about. Before we get into the actual top 10, and I want to talk about that for a second. Top 10 is kind of subjective. We bring them up based on what we see out there, but everybody's top 10 is going to be different, and there's no real particular order, although I will think as I get to the end, number 1, 2, and 3 carry the most weight. But before you do anything with a compliance program, before anything at all happens, and as you're building compliance programs and maintaining them, the accepted practice is what they call the 7 elements of compliance. And I'm not going to take you through every single one, but in the compliance sort of geek world, it's our 10 commandments, and these are what you need to do, because in the medical practice, in the world of compliance, really what you're trying to do, because nobody will be perfect with this, is you're trying to get yourself into what they call a safe harbor. And if you do these, if you practice these 7 elements of compliance, that will put you in a safe harbor. And it's something that you can always fall back on. And along with safe harbor, you'll hear the term a lot, reasonable precautions that can put you in a defendable position. So nobody's saying that you're not going to mess up, that there won't be problems. But can you honestly look at the regulator or the insurance carrier or whatever and say, we took reasonable precautions? Because if you can, that's really going to go a long way. And number one, as you're implementing your program, documentation is huge. If it wasn't written, it never took place. And you can be doing a great job with compliance, but you really want to make sure that you are documenting everything. In fact, most places do a good job on what we call the physical side of compliance. We'll take HIPAA as an example. You're generally not in the waiting room talking about Mr. Jones's rash, or you're not you're not throwing protected health information all over the place and things like that. You're really on a physical side of things, trying to do a good job with regards to things like safety and OSHA. You keep a neat and clean place. But again, where most places fall short on this is actually implementing all the written policies and procedures and the standards of conduct. And there's a few reasons for that. One is it's very time consuming. Two is it's really boring, actually. And I guess the other reason is it's kind of complicated. Everything's so gray. It's just hard to wrap your arms around it. As you do that, you also, very importantly, want to designate or appoint a compliance officer and a compliance committee. Don't do this alone. In fact, they don't even like to see that you do it alone, because if you build all this in a vacuum, then it hasn't been broadcasted with a culture of compliance across your organization. So it is very important. Get other people involved. Hire outside help where you need to, and so that's what once you've got a compliance officer and a compliance committee, you'll get other people involved. Education is absolutely the cornerstone of a program. I just mentioned, if you build this great program, but you've done it in a vacuum and nobody knows about it, the feds or anybody auditing you will sniff that out very quickly, because they do employee interviews and things like that. If you have a compliance issue, make sure you respond to it and document how you responded to it and corrected it, and what you're going to do going forward to try to prevent that from happening again. Auditing is an ongoing process. You want to be doing this all the time. Somebody said to me the other day, it's like washing the windows of the Empire State Building. You go on all 4 sides of it. Well, by the time you get to the other side, it's time to do it again. So you really want to make sure that you are auditing your program, monitoring it, and you can do this internally or externally, but just make sure you do it. Communication, that kind of gets back to education. It also really talks about, a lot of people are now using hotlines, or you just want to communicate to your employees how they communicate back to you if they see an issue, whether it be email, voicemail, a hotline, walk down the hall and knock on my door. But just make sure you have some type of communication set up. And enforcing, you can have the greatest program in the world, but if you have somebody that's not paying attention to it and you don't enforce it with disciplinary guidelines and actually make it happen, then you've done all of this kind of for nothing. So let's get into this. And I mentioned the top 10 regulatory compliance problems. They are different for everybody. So for a nurse, it might be bloodborne pathogens and infection control and providing a safe place for the patients and things like that. For an IT guy, it might be all the HIPAA stuff. For a stakeholder and someone who owns the practice, it might be fraud, waste, and abuse, and making sure that the feds aren't going to come in and hit them with a big fine. So again, it is all kind of subjective. On the first one, I'm going to start with bloodborne pathogens and an exposure control plan of pulling that together. And I didn't do it on all my slides, but I put together at the end there, you see 29 CFR 1910.1030. That means nothing to you, I'm sure, but if nothing else, I just want to show that this is a code federal regulation. We didn't make this stuff up, and these are basically the cornerstone of OSHA. And OSHA is just really saying that you are providing, as the employer, you need to provide a safe work site for your employees and prevent exposures from happening, whether it be bloodborne pathogens, hazardous materials, X-ray. It all depends upon, what may be a potential hazard in your organization, which really talks a little bit about the fact making sure that when you pull together an OSHA program with bloodborne pathogens and the general duty clause and all the things that go in there, making sure that you make it facility and site specific and specialty specific, because every place is in fact different. I will tell you, while this has been the #1 reason for an on-site visit for OSHA, it is rapidly changing. And there is another very big issue in healthcare, and in fact, workplace violence. On January 10th, I was actually in Washington, D.C. with the director of OSHA, Jordan Barab, and he is a guy who basically regulates coal mines and construction and meat packing and all the manufacturing and things that are really very dangerous industries. Well, they're so concerned now about workplace violence in healthcare that they are promulgating and doing what's called an RFI, request for information, to get all the information necessary so they can actually make and mandate workplace violence training, active shooter, all the stuff that you read about. But a couple of stats here that are actually they're disturbing. It is the #1 cause of injury for women in healthcare, and in the U.S., by the way, in general. The chance of getting a violent attack on yourself in healthcare is 6 to 10 times higher than it is in any other industry, and they believe that that's grossly under-exaggerated, actually, because a lot of these things go underreported and unreported. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about this, and it's interesting as I go into practices, I'll talk to them about hazard communication and handling of medical waste and all the OSHA stuff, and they're like, yeah, we got this, we're doing that. And then I mention workplace violence, and they say, well, what's that? You see their eyes kind of roll, and I say, well, workplace violence, and I explain, that could be a disgruntled boyfriend who waits in the parking lot, or it could be, and almost to every practice you end up hearing something about bullying or some type of issue that happens. So it really has become a big issue in the workplace, and especially in healthcare. Something, unfortunately, that we didn't used to hear about too many years ago is active shooter. Think about what you're doing in your practice. What are you going to do if you have an active shooter come in? It's based, by the way, it's run, hide, barricade, and fight. Fight is obviously the last thing, but if that's what it comes down to. And so be aware. Put together a program in your practice. You know where your exits are. Are your windows on the 5th floor and you can't possibly jump? So what are you going to do? You're going to put a rope in there that you really want to think about what you have to do. And unfortunately, it's kind of a testament of the society in which we're living. But healthcare has become a real big target for that. And there are basically four types of workplace violence. And the first one is criminal. I guess you can all understand that. Somebody that's coming in with a gun and wants to rob you. The second one is patient on employee or caregiver. The third one is is staff on staff, and again, that can be anything as minor as bullying or actual physical violence. And the fourth one, which we see a lot, is a known person, maybe a disgruntled partner or whatever. But if you think about it, in your workplace, or if somebody is trying to find you, where are they going to find you? You go there every day from 8:30 to 5:30. You take the same lunch break. So I guess that's kind of why it happens. One or two other statistics which are also alarming is the number one and two most violent jobs in America, this won't be a surprise to you, are police and firefighters. Number three is healthcare. So as I've stressed a few times, it really has become a big issue, and keep your eyes and ears out for that. Things that you can do, just very common sense wise, is walk around your facility. Take note of your exit doors, bring it up in staff meetings, and very importantly, walk around the perimeter of your building. We just worked with a group over in Pennsylvania, and they have a very tight parking lot. In other words, they don't have enough parking spots. So their employees all park, it's probably less than a quarter of a mile away, but it's a few parking lots down. And they all end up taking a shortcut almost through the woods behind it, and they had an issue because it wasn't well lit. So look around your parking lot. Is it well lit? Maybe that person that stays late all the time and works great and has works extra and closes the place down, that's alone every night. Maybe that's not a good idea. So you really want to start thinking about that in your organization. Let's move to employee policies. This is kind of more legal stuff. It's stuff you're probably all pretty familiar with, but it's harassment, it's discrimination, it's unfair treatment, it's wrongful termination. Really important in this to have your employee manual together. Make sure that it's updated. Make sure that your employees are trained on it and they understand it, and have them sign off on it. Have them document that they've been trained on it. We live in a very litigious society. People are suing their employers right and left, and I don't want to get on the scare side, but it's just the reality of it. There are a couple of pretty good options that you have to pull together a good employee manual, and your payroll companies, ADP and Paychex, I think they can offer that. Your law firm, that can get a little expensive, obviously, but it's less expensive than having an issue and having nothing documented. And this whole presentation today is not meant to be a big sales pitch for Healthcare Compliance Network, but obviously we do all of these things as well. Just want to give you some other potential ideas and options as to how to handle it. So number 7, HIPAA in general. Kind of a funny title for a slide, but there's HIPAA high tech, there's HIPAA, SRA. There's all of these acronyms being thrown around there. But HIPAA in general, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. I'm sure you kind of know what's going on with it. But I'd like to just address a couple of things with that in sort of the general aspect. There's your technical, administrative, and physical safeguards. Technical, from what I can understand, most of you are coming to this seminar through Priority One or are talking to Priority One. If you're working with Priority One, you're going to be doing a good job there. They're excellent. They make sure everything from firewalls are set up, disaster recovery, who's logging in, passwords being changed, all of the accepted standards, and that's a whole other seminar in itself, or a whole week-long seminar for crying out loud. But the technical, the IT side of it is certainly very important with regards to security and hacking and cyber attacks and all of that. Administrative and physical, you don't hear people talk quite as much about that, or maybe you don't hear as much about it. Administrative is simply, what are your policies and procedures? When you hire someone, what are you giving them access to? When someone leaves or is terminated, how do you make sure you turn off their their email, their access to the EMR, the key to the practice. All of those things are kind of administrative policies and procedures. As we talked about earlier, developing a plan, all of this stuff obviously has to be written. It's got to be specific to your organization. It's got to be updated. And of course, employees need to be trained. But last, I'll talk a little bit about physical safeguards, because everybody is correctly concerned about the technical stuff. Don't forget about the physical safeguards. You know, where do you keep your records? Your paper. A lot of people still have paper records. Where do you keep it? Is it under lock and key? Is it? Do you have a sign on the door as simple that says authorized personnel only? How do you lock up at night? What's available? What's your security downstairs? All of that stuff. Because if you have something that is physically stolen, and by the way, that could be a laptop or a thumb drive or something, and then you're in a whole different deal, because you're into many hundreds of records. But you need to be able to say, yeah, you know, we took reasonable precautions. You know, we lock our doors. We've got a security company. You know, all that stuff. Just don't forget to think about the physical safeguards. It's kind of interesting. I grew up in farm country. I personally did not grow up on a farm, but most of my friends did, and we used to love it in the winter. One of my friends' dads would say, yeah, you guys can take the snowmobiles out, but make sure before you go out into the woods and stuff, do me a favor, you know, go around the perimeter of the farm and make sure there's no holes in the fence, and you know, people, you know, our livestock can't get out and the predators can't get in. And it occurred to me, I've mentioned this in other presentations, that's very similar in a way to a medical practice. What is a good HIPAA program? A good HIPAA program is you want to keep all of your valuable assets inside your fence, so to speak, and not able to get out, and you want to make sure that predators on the outside can't get in, unless, of course, they come in through your gate. But that's being controlled and monitored, and you're overseeing exactly what's happening, and it's all, you know, well documented and all that stuff. It may not have been at the farm, but you get the visual sort of metaphor here, and that's what you want to do as a practice administrator. You know, take a walk around, see where, and pretend you haven't been there before. See where your protected health information is. See how people are talking in the waiting room. See if screens can be easily seen. See if patients are walking through areas where there's a lot of charts. So that's just kind of a practical piece of advice for you. Still on the HIPAA note, and this is a big deal. The OCR, which stands for Office for Civil Rights, by the way, they're basically the ones that are the kind of the police for HIPAA under Health and Human Services. They are going to concentrate on this in a big way, and already are. There's examples of it, and the reason they're doing that is because it's an old expression, but you're only as good as your weakest link. And there are a lot of business associates out there that are not doing a very good job. And it's, unfortunately, now it's incumbent upon you, if your BA, your business associate, has a breach, then it's your breach, unless you have a business associate agreement with them. Even if you have a business associate agreement with them, you still have, you know, some responsibility, but it's much less. One good way to figure out, and obviously this is not yet an interactive seminar, but if people are asking themselves, well, how do I figure out who a business associate is? The best way that I tell people is to say, hey, go to your accounts payable and take a look at all the people you write a check to every month, and say, for them to do their job that I hired them to do they need access to electronic protected health information or just protected health information? And if that's the case, then you need to have a business associate agreement with them. So, for example, you don't need to have a business associate agreement with maybe your housekeeping service, But you do need to have a business associate agreement with someone like Priority One, with someone that does coding and chart audit, with someone that does your collections, your shredding service. I won't go through all of that with you right now, but you want to make sure that you have your business associate agreements and that you are monitoring them, because essentially what your business associates now have to do is they are under the exact same regulations that you guys are, as they call you CEs, or covered entities, which essentially is providers or medical practices. So you guys have to pull all this together. Now they've got to do the same thing, and you're responsible for monitoring that from them and asking them those questions. Reporting of breaches. I just want to show these next couple of slides just sort of show some stats and stuff that's coming out from the actual government or the press and things like that. So reporting of breach is I think there's a bit of a misconception, especially in the medical practice world. It's like, well, you know, it's only if you have a breach of 500 or more individuals. So like if a thumb drive was stolen or a laptop or whatever. Well, yeah, for sure, that's the case. That's got to be reported, and that goes up, and that's got to be reported immediately, and you'll need legal help and all that stuff, and it's a whole process. And they've given the great name to this. It's called the Wall of Shame. If you don't believe me, Google HIPAA Wall of Shame, and you'll see, you know, New Jersey has its whole section there as well as every state, and you don't want to be on that, obviously, but that's for 500 or more. So I think there's been maybe the misconception that, you know, that's the only time you have to report. Well, if you look at the next paragraph down, which I will read aloud, for breaches of unsecured PHI that involve fewer than 500 individuals, HIPAA requires a covered entity to maintain a log or other documentation of such breaches and to notify the secretary no later than 60 days after the end of the calendar year. So, if you think about where we are right now, we're at the, you know, January is basically toast. So by the end of February, you are required to notify the secretary of any breaches that you had. So, number one, you need to think if you had any breaches, and if you documented, and if you did, is it worthy of reporting? Was it really a breach? Was it an accidental disclosure? That's a whole other seminar in itself as well. But those are things that you need to be thinking about. This one to me is troubling because it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, almost. So if you're, you know, regular medical practice and you're seeing, you know, 100 patients a week and 5,000 a year, and you do not report any breaches, to some extent, and we've heard about this, to some extent they look at it and say, wow, they had 5,000, you know, 5,000, they didn't have one breach, nothing to report at all, so they're perfect. That may be the case. Or some people say, well, geez, if I report, does that put me on a list? The answer is probably no to both of them, but it just sort of adds to the whole thing that the government is now watching all this stuff. So it's something that you really want to consider, and you know, make sure that you do your reporting one way or the other before the end of February. The next one, this is just another stat that I thought was kind of interesting, and it's talking about breach, and it goes through what shocked me on this one. It's kind of hard to see, but banking was 0.2% where breaches happen. Business, yeah, that makes sense. 16%. Education, that's a little bit surprising. But government and military, you can understand why that's big, because you got bad actors trying to get. I mean, you got ISIS, you got the Russians trying to hack, you know, the whole thing. So that doesn't surprise me. But healthcare, if you'll notice, is the highest. It's the highest of all of them. And it's interesting because, you know, we always hear about TJ Maxx and Home Depot and all these things, you know, and all this information getting out that shouldn't get out, or people hacking in and pulling stuff out and this and that. And it kind of begs the question, well, why is healthcare the highest? And the reason being is follow the money. So I'll just take you to the last one, because the last item on this slide, and it's actually from the Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights. It's Devin McGraw. Medical records are worth up to 10 times more than credit card numbers. And they're worth that because medical records live forever. It's got your, you know, your home address, maybe your social security number, your height, your weight, not to mention your protected health information. It may even have financial information in there, a credit card or a canceled check. So it's worth a lot. When someone steals a credit card, you know, generally the banks pick it up, and whoever stole it gets off with maybe a tank of gas and a candy bar or something. And, you know, it's done. It's shut out. But a medical record lives, can live forever, and, you know, you've got the whole identity theft and all of that. The stat that kind of surprised me the most was hackers are likely to breach 1 in 3 healthcare customers during 2016. Obviously, this slide is a little bit over a year old, but, you know, that comes from the Washington Times. That's not just fear mongers making this stuff up. So keep your eye on that one as well. Still in the HIPAA vein, security risk audit. Pretty sure that most people are aware of this, especially if you're doing meaningful use. That's the last bullet point, MU attestation. You're required to do the security risk audit. By the way, HIPAA requires that you do it as well. It's not just for, some people think, oh, it's just for meaningful use. No, it's for everybody. And this is also can help you provide a safe harbor or put you in a defendable position. It's going to minimize your liability and your breach potential. We were just doing one the other day, and the place seemed to be pretty well buttoned up, but they're not encrypting any of their emails. Well, that's a huge red flag, and that's something that's immediately addressable. And it surprises me when we find things like this with, you know, fairly sophisticated organizations. But take a look at your security risk audit. By the way, if anybody wants a tool or the sort of the bullet points on what are involved in a security risk audit, well, number one, I'm sure Nelson Gomes over at Priority One can do that for you, but feel free to email or contact me, and I can show you through that, or send it to you, either one. Stark and anti-kickback. Now we're getting sort of into the money side of the practice and what CMS and, you know, fraud and abuse and everybody's looking at. This obviously has also become a very complicated and important piece of compliance. So, and where I'm going with that is, if you are doing an assessment of your organization, you want to do like an organizational compliance assessment. And what that really gets into is typically to the stakeholders and the doctors. Do they own an ambulatory surgery center? Are they part owner? Do they own office buildings that they lease out to other medical practices? What type of rent agreements do they have? What type of leasing agreements do they have? Are there any favors done for referrals that are coming back? What type of ancillary services do they have? Are they, you know, giving rebates and professional courtesies? This does get very complicated, but it's something that you want to look at, the types of business relationships that doctors have with the hospitals, with any investments they have, and ownership and things like that. Training. I guess we have that listed as number 3, and some people may list that as number 1 or whatever, but it is absolutely the cornerstone of any compliance program. And let's take the 3 or 4 things we mentioned here. OSHA. You know, if your employees aren't trained and they don't know how to use and where the personal protective equipment is, or what chemicals they're working with, and various precautions they should be taking. HIPAA, if they don't understand that they shouldn't be blabbing at a cocktail party about Mrs. Smith's cardiac condition, fraud, waste, and abuse. If people aren't aware that they need to report things if they see them going, see things happening that are illegal or sort of outside the boundaries. Training is extremely important. It's going to be one of the first things that anybody asks. They will typically interview employees. We just had one this week, actually, right in your backyard in New Jersey. OSHA came in, small practice, and interviewed all the employees before the doctor could get back. Doctor didn't know, how to handle it, and the employees, probably said some things, not incorrectly, but certainly said some things that did not help the case of that particular medical practice. So training can really help prevent issues from occurring, and so that's first and foremost. In fact, in most situations when I see an audit happen, if people had been trained properly, the audit may not have ever happened because the employee would not have gone directly to the feds and become a whistleblower. They would have sort of kept it inside the family, if you know what I mean. So training is important. It needs to be specific to your organization. It needs to be updated and constantly updated. You want to make sure that training is done annually, and as you bring new hires on board, as regulations change, and of course, I think we've had this in most every slide, is you got to make sure you document it. Coding and billing audits. Highest risk compliance area in a standalone medical practice. That alone should sort of, that kind of encapsulates it. Because that's where the money is, and we'll get into that a little bit. But, coding and billing audits it's very important that you do it. You can do it internally and or externally. I recommend a combination of both. Good idea to do what they call a prospective audit. So do your audit before the bills go out, because you can change them without having to say, oh boy, we audited ourselves from last September and we found all these things. Well, you absolutely then need to self-disclose and hire attorneys and things like that, and build a corrective action plan and pay lots of fines. So that's an important issue. And I just mentioned it earlier. The reason that this is happening is because where the money is. The government now with their audits is for every dollar they spend, they're recovering $13. So that's a pretty good investment. And the government's broke, and it has become a very big hotspot for them. Within the coding and billing hotspots, the red flags that they'll see is medical necessity. And it's just not documented properly, and it's not validated. And EMR cloning. With the EMR now around, we are just seeing cloning right and left, and that is absolutely sparking a lot of audits. So if you see your providers doing that, please make them well aware of that. And most of it, and I guess the last bullet point is, documentation not supporting the code. Something you can all understand. As a recommendation, you want to do 10 to 20 charts per year per provider, and more when you find somebody that's not doing well, and that they're constantly upcoding or undercoding. We do see both of that, both of those areas happening, and it's a really important part of your program. Of course, you want to document that. And it puts you in a good position if you're doing this proactively. You're going to say, hey, you know what? We're checking ourselves. We're making sure that we're doing everything above board here. And really, the only way to find issues is to actually do an audit. And that goes with all the things. That goes with your HIPAA and your security risk assessment. It goes with OSHA, and it goes, of course, with billing and coding compliance. The number one topic is absent or ineffective corporate compliance plan. And this wraps around everything. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the term code of conduct, but code of conduct is essentially just saying what your practice does, that you're going to obey and follow state and federal guidelines. And the big thing here, and we'll see a lot of stakeholders or doctors or the people that own the practice say, well, you know, why do I need to do this? Well, it's one of the first areas of the contract they sign. It's called condition of participation. So if you are billing Medicare or Medicaid, their condition of participation is that you comply with all of this, and that if you see issues going on, that you're going to self-disclose. And it's essentially they're guarding their investment. They're saying, you know, you guys have to police yourself, and if we have to come in and get involved, it may not be that pleasant. So it's really important. It can help divert what they call treble damages. So if you're auditing yourself and you have a good compliance program together and you find something wrong, you can self-disclose, which is a fancy way of saying you can report yourself back to the feds, and chances are you'll only have to pay back, you know, maybe what you were overpaid, maybe 1.5 times. But if they come in and find it, you have what's called treble damages, which means 3 times the damages, number one. And number two, most concerningly, is they do what they call extrapolate. So if they find that Dr. Smith had been coding something a level 4 that barely supports a level 2 for the last 3 months, they're going to say, well, we're going to assume that he or she's been doing that for the last 5 years. So we're going to take all of that times 5 years times 3, and that's when you start getting into the millions of dollars of fines. And the reason I mention this really is not to, you know, scare the heck out of anybody or anything, but the pushback that we see from the stakeholders, the doctors, the people that own the practice, is that this stuff is, why should I do it? It's too expensive. It's an unfunded mandate. We hear all of that. Well, there are a lot of reasons to do it, and again, the condition of participation, the contract that they signed, and the treble damages and the extrapolation, that alone should get someone to sit up and say, yep, probably pretty important that I do this. Because if they don't, you can be put on what's called the exclusion list, and you don't want to be excluded, because if you get excluded, not only are you out of the Medicare business, but you're probably out of the medical business altogether. So you don't want to be excluded. And on that topic, you should have somebody in your practice that checks the OIG exclusion list on a monthly basis, and as you hire new people, to make sure that you're not hiring somebody that's on that excluded list. And if you just Google OIG exclusion list, it'll take you right to it. I think you can put 5 or 10 names in at a time, but you want to do that for all your employees and your vendors. So there's a lot here. Just wanted to kind of run through, at least from our vantage point, you know, what the top 10 are. And at this point, I would like to, first of all, open it up for questions and say thank you and all of that. So, Robert, I think we're doing pretty well on time here. If any questions have come over the transom, I'd be happy to see if I can maybe answer them for you.
Terrific. Thank you, Wix,
You're welcome.
for a very informative presentation. You certainly covered quite a bit of information in a relatively short amount of time. And as you mentioned, we will now begin the Q&A portion of the program. And to remind our attendees, they can submit any questions they would like by typing them into their control panel in the space labeled enter a question for staff and clicking send. Let's jump right into it. First question, interesting one. This person asked if they do an audit of themselves, of their practice, why would they ever want to turn themselves in to self-disclose? Wouldn't it be better off just to fix it, no harm, no foul, move on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And by the way, years ago, it used to be, you could sort of use ignorance as a plea. Now they actually have something they call deliberate ignorance, which means you didn't bother to read things like conditions of participation, which I just mentioned. But let me take this in a couple of different slices almost. So self-disclose. Okay, so let's say you're doing an OSHA audit and you find out you don't have an eye wash station and you haven't written up an emergency evacuation plan. All right, so get an eye wash station, write up your emergency evacuation plan, train your staff on it, and that's fine. You're not going to need to call OSHA and say, hey, we didn't have an eye wash station, and we're going to put one in next week, but why don't you come by and take a look to make sure it's all right? I mean, you can if you want, but no. So for something like that, absolutely, not a problem. Same thing with something maybe like HIPAA. Hey, we just realized that some of our screens are visible to outside visitors and patients, so we put on those little screen protectors. You don't need to call HIPAA and say, hey, wait, self-disclosure really goes down to where the money is, and those were the last couple of slides that I addressed. So if you do, and it's the example I gave earlier, if you do determine when you've done an audit that Dr. Smith has been billing for the last 6 months a level 4 and it doesn't support anything over a level 2, well, you know what? You do need to self-disclose there, because then you're coming to them proactively. You pay the money back and you tell them how you're going to move forward. So you really, in that case, will want to self-disclose, because you're taking a big gamble, and they have all types of algorithms and stuff now in the billing that you do through CMS that they can see this stuff. So it's hard to just say, you know what, let's just take our chances. So you're much better off self-disclosing, telling them how you're going to move forward proactively, paying the money back, and that's it, because it puts you in a very defendable position.
Terrific, thank you. Let's move into the next question. This person notes much of what you're describing. It's all an unfunded mandate by the feds. Who's supposed to pay for all of this?
Okay, so you're not going to like this answer. You are. Again, it's part of your condition of participation. You're taking money from the feds, and they're saying if you're gonna sign this contract and you're going to take money from the feds, well, these are our guidelines, our requirements, our laws, quite frankly, and you need to abide by them. How you do it? Well, that's just all part of it. That's all part of the money we're giving you. So yeah, I hear that a lot, Robert, and it's a great question, and probably not the answer certainly that the doctors want to hear. But yeah, it's on them to get it done, whether they pay outside people to do it, hire inside people to do it. It's something they need to pay attention to and fund it however they deem necessary.
Thank you, Rick. As painful as it is for our audience to hear that, I'm sure they appreciate you're not sugarcoating it. It is a program on compliance, after all.
Yep.
The next question concerns your discussion of 7 elements. But the person wants to know where those 7 elements came from. Is it something that you and your company developed?
No, it's not. In fact, we did years ago, before 7, we had what was called the AIM principle, AIM, and it stood for assess, implement, and maintain. which really is essentially the 7 elements. But no, the 7 elements, if again, I keep asking everybody to refer to our buddy Dr. Google, but if you Google 7 elements of compliance by the OIG, you'll see that's theirs. They made that up, and that's them saying it's. I think at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned it's the 10 commandments in the Bible. Well, that's their 10 commandments, and really, I've seen it happen time and time again. If you can stand behind those 7 elements and say, hey, that's what we're doing, you are absolutely going to put yourself in a safe harbor and mitigate fines. So no, I would like to take credit for that, but we did not develop that. We just that's what we go off of, because it is known as best practices for sure.
Terrific, thank you. Next question, this person is looking for some more information about compliance committees, details such as how should they form one and how often should they meet, etc.
Okay, that's a good question, and it depends, but let me put some parameters around the it depends. So one thing it depends upon is how large your organization is. So Hackensack or St. Barnabas, they have a compliance department and compliance committees and committees to form committees and all that stuff. I believe our audience today is sort of your average medical practice. So your compliance committee is not going to be, it's going to be appropriate to the organization. So it would typically be the doctor, I keep saying the stakeholder because that's a sort of a federal term that they use, the person whose purse is going to get affected if there's a problem, because they can affect decisions and make changes and things like that. And they should want to be involved in compliance, by the way. And then typically the office manager or the administrator, perhaps somebody that's involved in IT, and then someone that's involved in billing, and someone that has a clinical background like a nurse that's involved in infection control. That would be a good 3 or 4 or 5 people to have on your compliance committee. If you are a practice that has 6 employees, well, then it's going to be the doctor and the office manager probably, and you're going to meet maybe twice a year. The bigger you are, the more people you want to get involved. But let me narrow it down again a little bit more. So I mentioned for HIPAA, it's probably the IT guy. For the fraud, waste, and abuse stuff, it's probably the revenue cycle or the person that's in charge of billing. For the clinical, OSHA type stuff, it's probably going to be a nurse or somebody like that. And then probably the administrator and the doctor. Now, who should be the compliance officer? And I would recommend that it be one of the stakeholders or somebody in the C level, like the CEO or the VP of administration, or the executive administrator of the practice.
Excellent. Looking at the time, let's answer one more. I'm going to answer one more question. I'll give you an opportunity to share some thoughts, final thoughts, and then we'll conclude. So as I mentioned, and as this person noted, you covered a lot of information in the presentation. You mentioned 10 areas as this attendee's feeling a bit overwhelmed by the wealth of information that you covered. Can you identify what you feel would be the first 1 or 2 areas you would start if the person's looking to work their way through your 10?
Sure. And that's good because we do rejigger this PowerPoint a lot to see where that goes. So I would have to say the first thing is pulling together your corporate compliance program, because that encapsulates all areas of compliance within your practice, and then really take a look at your billing and chart audit compliance, because that's where I see a lot of the audits happening. The next one, the big vulnerability, is HIPAA in general. That's your IT security. It is your security risk audit, and just making sure you're really well buttoned up there. And what has jumped really up towards the top, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, is workplace violence. We're seeing a lot more OSHA audits. We're seeing a lot more attention to it, and so once again, subjective, but those would be the three that I would work on.
Terrific. Listen, that's all the time we're going to have for questions. If Wix did not have an opportunity to address your question, we'll provide it to him along with their contact information for follow-up. Wix, let me give you an opportunity to share some final thoughts, and then I'm going to wrap up our program.
Final thoughts are, thank you for coming and participating, and the people that asked the questions. And you'll see my phone number and my email address up there, so feel free to contact me anytime if you'd like to have your office looked at as for a quick compliance review. We do that type of assessment at no charge as an initial consult. So I said I wouldn't give a big sales pitch, but that's what we do, and we'd be happy to do that for you. So I hope everybody has a great weekend, I guess, is my final parting comment.
Excellent. Thank you, Wix. And you took some of the words out of my mouth. Again, I'm going to point people to your contact information on this final slide as a way to reach out to you, but all the attendees will be receiving a copy of the presentation as well, and so they'll have that information provided to them. I want to once again thank Wix for an informative presentation, Priority One Group for sponsoring the program, and all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. This concludes today's webinar. Thanks again for your participation. Have a great day and a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.